The people who smile the brightest are sometimes the ones hiding the deepest pain. Emily Parker had practiced that smile so many times that even she almost believed it. Every morning she stood in front of the tiny mirror inside the staff hallway, adjusted the loose cream-colored scarf around her neck, tucked a few strands of blonde hair behind her ear, and reminded herself that today would be easier than yesterday. It never was. The Romano estate stretched across nearly 20 acres outside Chicago, a fortress of stone, iron, and silence where powerful men came to negotiate fortunes that ordinary people would never understand. Emily had only worked there for 12 days as the new pastry assistant, yet everyone already knew her for one reason. She was the sweet, overweight girl who somehow managed to turn even simple tasks into tiny disasters. She dropped mixing bowls, confused salt with sugar, bumped into carts, apologized at least 20 times before lunch, and somehow made the toughest security guards fight back smiles whenever she nervously laughed at herself. They called her Sunshine when they thought she couldn't hear, because no matter how embarrassed she became, she always smiled anyway. What nobody noticed was that she never let anyone stand behind her, and she never removed that scarf, even inside the warm kitchen. On that rainy Thursday afternoon, the mansion felt unusually tense. Black SUVs rolled through the front gates one after another. Men in tailored suits spoke quietly into earpieces while checking every hallway. Something important was happening upstairs. Emily stayed focused on decorating lemon cupcakes, humming softly to herself as if the outside world didn't exist. She carefully carried a tray across the polished marble floor, only to catch the edge of her shoe against a decorative rug. The tray tilted. Dozens of cupcakes bounced across the floor like tiny yellow clouds. Buttercream landed on expensive shoes. The room froze. Emily covered her mouth with both hands. I'm so sorry, she whispered, her cheeks turning crimson. Several guards looked away to hide their amusement. One older housekeeper sighed, already reaching for cleaning towels. Before anyone spoke again, another pair of footsteps echoed through the hallway. Slow, steady. Every conversation stopped instantly. Adrian DeLuca had entered the room. Even Emily, who barely understood the world surrounding the estate, knew exactly who he was. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his tattooed hands resting calmly at his sides, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man nobody questioned twice. Stories about him traveled through every employee entrance, though nobody ever repeated them loudly. Emily quickly knelt to gather the ruined desserts before he reached her. "I'm really sorry, sir," she murmured without lifting her eyes. As she leaned forward, the scarf slipped just enough for a faint purple bruise near her collarbone to catch the afternoon light. Adrian noticed it immediately. He said nothing at first. Instead, he bent down, picked up a cupcake that had somehow survived intact, and placed it gently back onto the tray. Emily reached for the scarf too quickly, fumbling as her trembling fingers struggled to hide the mark again. She forced another cheerful smile, but this one didn't reach her eyes. Adrian watched the movement with unsettling patience. "Look at me," he said quietly. Emily hesitated before obeying. For the first time since arriving at the estate, their eyes met. Hers carried exhaustion hidden behind kindness. His revealed nothing at all. The silence stretched so long that even the rain outside seemed to pause. Finally, Adrian spoke in a voice so calm it was almost impossible to fear. "Who did that to you?" Emily blinked, then laughed awkwardly. "Oh, it's nothing. I walked into a cabinet door." Adrian studied her face for another moment. She was a terrible liar. Her hands shook. Her breathing had changed. Most of all, she instinctively apologized before anyone had accused her of anything. He had seen enough frightened people in his life to recognize the difference between clumsiness and fear. Emily lowered her head again, hoping the conversation would end. Instead, Adrian took one deliberate step closer, his expression never changing. "Wrong answer," he said softly. "Tell me his name." Emily Parker did not answer. Her smile lingered for one impossible second before quietly fading, replaced by the same polite expression she wore whenever life became too heavy to carry. "I really should clean this up before Chef Daniel sees the mess," she said gently, reaching for another cupcake as though buttercream on marble was suddenly the most urgent problem in the world. Adrian DeLuca watched her for another heartbeat, then turned without another word and continued toward the private conference room where representatives from 3 powerful organizations were already waiting. Nobody spoke until the heavy doors closed behind him. Only then did the entire kitchen seem to breathe again. Emily released a breath she had not realized she had been holding and pressed one hand against her racing heart. She told herself that if she worked harder, smiled brighter, and stayed invisible, everything would return to normal. It never worked that way. 12 days earlier, she had arrived at the Romano estate carrying 2 suitcases that looked older than she was. The employment agency had promised excellent pay, free housing, and a chance to start over. That last promise mattered more than anything. She wanted distance from the apartment where every creaking floorboard reminded her of fear. She wanted mornings that began with the smell of fresh bread instead of arguments echoing through thin walls. She wanted to believe people could build entirely new lives simply by driving a few hundred miles away. The mansion itself felt like another universe. Crystal chandeliers reflected sunlight across polished stone floors. Gardens stretched farther than she could see. Even the kitchens were larger than the grocery store where she had worked through high school. On her very first morning, she became hopelessly lost while trying to deliver a tray of croissants. Instead of reaching the breakfast room, she accidentally wandered into the security training gym where nearly 20 bodyguards stopped exercising to stare at the confused young woman holding pastries instead of paperwork. Emily blinked twice before asking with complete sincerity, "Does anyone here know where breakfast lives?" The room remained silent for exactly 3 seconds before several men burst into laughter. One guard actually had to sit down because he was laughing so hard. Emily laughed too, rubbing the back of her neck with embarrassed relief after realizing her mistake. By lunchtime, everyone knew her name. Over the following days, she somehow managed to trigger the automatic sprinklers while attempting to water herbs, locked herself inside the walk-in refrigerator for nearly 15 minutes after pushing the wrong door, and once thanked a marble statue because she genuinely believed someone had opened the hallway door for her. Even the stern housekeeper, Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, eventually surrendered to a reluctant smile. "Child," she sighed one afternoon, "you have the survival instincts of a golden retriever." Emily simply grinned. "People tell me that is a compliment." Beneath those cheerful moments, however, small habits quietly formed. She always checked every window before entering her room. She jumped whenever unfamiliar phones vibrated nearby. She never accepted rides into the city on her days off. Every Friday evening she disappeared for exactly 1 hour. Returning with groceries, she insisted on paying for in cash. Nobody questioned her because everyone assumed she was sending money to family. Adrian noticed something different. During security briefings, he had developed an unusual talent for recognizing patterns that other people ignored. Emily smiled with her whole face whenever she helped someone else. Yet every time her own phone illuminated with an incoming message, that smile disappeared instantly. Fear replaced it with practiced speed. She never answered in front of anyone. She always walked outside before speaking. And every conversation ended the same way. She apologized, even though nobody standing beside her had heard a single accusation. Adrian found himself remembering those moments far longer than he intended. It irritated him. His life had always depended upon discipline, distance, and absolute emotional control. Caring about employees created unnecessary weaknesses. Yet every instinct he trusted continued whispering the same. Conclusion: Emily Parker was not running from her past. Whatever frightened her had already found her again. The following afternoon, Adrian DeLuca dismissed the last of his advisors nearly an hour earlier than planned. Yet instead of reviewing contracts or meeting with financial consultants, he found himself standing beside the tall windows of his private office, watching the courtyard below. Employees crossed the stone pathways carrying baskets of herbs, fresh produce, and deliveries from local farms. Among them, one familiar figure hurried across the garden with a cardboard box nearly half her size. Emily Parker could barely see over the top of it. She took 3 careful steps, stumbled over absolutely nothing, somehow recovered her balance with an awkward little spin, then looked around to see if anyone had noticed before laughing quietly at herself. Even from the second floor, Adrian caught the unmistakable sound of that laughter. It was genuine this time, unforced. A few moments later, the bottom of the box suddenly gave way. Apples rolled across the pathway in every direction. Emily gasped dramatically before chasing them one by one across the courtyard while two gardeners tried unsuccessfully not to laugh. One bright red apple rolled directly toward Adrian's head of security, Marcus Hale. The 6'4" former Marine bent down, picked it up, and handed it back, without changing his serious expression. Emily accepted it with both hands as though receiving a priceless treasure. "Thank you," she said. "I think these apples are planning an escape." Marcus stared at her for a second before an unexpected smile appeared. "I will inform security to watch the fruit more closely." Emily giggled so hard that she nearly dropped the apple again. Watching from above, Adrian surprised himself by almost smiling. Almost. He turned away before anyone could notice. Later that evening, the mansion prepared for an important dinner involving influential business partners from several states. Every employee moved quickly through the enormous dining hall. Crystal glasses reflected warm light, while fresh flowers filled the room with subtle fragrance. Emily had been assigned one simple responsibility: place desserts on the side table after the main course. She repeated the instructions to herself nearly 20 times while carrying the tray. Walk slowly. Do not trip. Do not trip. Definitely do not trip. Naturally, she bumped into the edge of a chair anyway. Fortunately, this time she somehow managed to keep every dessert standing. She froze proudly before whispering to herself, "Personal growth." One nearby server heard her and covered his mouth to hide another laugh. Adrian entered moments later with several distinguished guests. Conversations immediately shifted toward business, investments, and future partnerships. Emily stayed near the wall, doing everything possible to remain unnoticed. Yet Adrian noticed something no one else did. As one guest casually mentioned a neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, Emily's shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. Her smile disappeared for less than 2 seconds before returning exactly as before. Tiny reactions like that rarely happened by accident. During dinner, her phone vibrated once inside the pocket of her apron. She glanced down for only an instant. The color drained from her face. Without reading another word, she quietly excused herself through the kitchen entrance. Adrian continued speaking without interruption, but his attention never truly left the hallway where she had disappeared. 5 minutes later, Marcus returned after checking the security cameras for an unrelated delivery schedule. Adrian spoke so quietly that nobody else heard him. "Where is Miss Parker?" Marcus looked mildly surprised by the question. "Outside near the greenhouse, sir." Adrian nodded once. Through the rain-speckled window, he could barely make out Emily standing alone beneath the covered walkway. She held the phone tightly against her ear while listening in complete silence. She never argued. She never defended herself. She simply closed her eyes for several long seconds before quietly saying, "I am sorry. I promise I will find a way." The call ended. She remained perfectly still, wiping away a single tear before taking one deep breath, practicing another cheerful smile, and walking back toward the mansion as though nothing had happened. Adrian had negotiated with politicians, billionaires, and dangerous rivals for years. He trusted facts more than assumptions. Still, one certainty settled quietly into his mind. Whatever burden Emily carried, it was growing heavier by the day, and whoever waited on the other end of those phone calls had already begun pulling that burden closer to the Romano estate. The next morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds and steady rain that painted the estate in muted shades of silver. Emily Parker loved rainy mornings because fewer people wandered through the gardens, leaving the kitchens quieter and somehow less intimidating. She tied on her apron, greeted everyone with her usual cheerful smile, and immediately managed to dust powdered sugar across half the counter after opening a bag too enthusiastically. "Well," she sighed with a tiny laugh, "the muffins are getting snow before Christmas." Even Chef Daniel shook his head with reluctant amusement before handing her another bag. "One day you are going to surprise me." Emily smiled. "I hope it is in a good way." "At this point," he replied, "either would be impressive." Laughter spread through the kitchen, and for a few precious minutes, she almost felt like an ordinary young woman building an ordinary life. Shortly before noon, she volunteered to deliver fresh pastries to the security office. Most employees avoided the room because the men inside rarely smiled, but Emily had discovered they became noticeably friendlier whenever cinnamon rolls appeared. She carefully balanced the tray with exaggerated concentration, whispering encouragement to herself. "Just 30 more steps. You are winning." She reached the office without dropping a single thing and proudly announced, "Mission accomplished." Marcus Hale looked up from several security monitors. That might be a first. Emily placed one hand over her heart with playful seriousness. "Please do not ruin my moment." Even two younger guards laughed. While they reached for breakfast, Emily wandered innocently toward the wall of surveillance screens, fascinated by dozens of camera angles displaying every corner of the enormous property. "You really can see everything from here," she said. Marcus answered without looking away from his tablet. "Almost everything." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "That must make it difficult to plan surprise birthday parties." Marcus stared at her for a long second before quietly muttering, "You think differently than everyone else." She smiled. That is usually another way of saying strange. As she turned to leave, her phone vibrated inside her pocket. The brightness vanished from her face so quickly that Marcus noticed immediately. Emily glanced at the display only once before excusing herself with unusual haste. She stepped into the empty service corridor, answered the call in a voice barely above a whisper, and listened without interrupting. "I already sent everything I could," she said softly. Another long silence followed. "Please, I am working. I cannot leave right now." Her shoulders gradually sank as though each sentence from the other end carried invisible weight. "No," she whispered. "Please do not come here." The call ended before she could say another word. Emily remained motionless for several seconds, pressing one trembling hand against the cool stone wall until her breathing finally slowed. She straightened her scarf, forced another gentle smile onto her face, and returned to work carrying an empty tray that suddenly felt much heavier than before. High above the kitchens, Adrian DeLuca stood inside the library reviewing financial reports that no longer held his attention. Through the open doorway, Marcus entered quietly and placed a slim folder upon the desk. Adrian raised one eyebrow. "I did not ask for a report." Marcus folded his hands behind his back. "No, sir. But I believe you intended to." Adrian looked at the folder without opening it. "Tell me." Marcus spoke carefully. "Miss Parker has received 11 phone calls from the same prepaid number during the last 6 days. Every call lasts less than 3 minutes. Every call is followed by visible distress. She leaves the building alone every Friday evening for exactly 1 hour. She returns with fewer groceries than the amount of cash she withdraws beforehand." Adrian remained silent. Marcus continued, "There is something else. Yesterday, one of our exterior cameras captured a dark sedan parked beyond the east gate for nearly 40 minutes. The license plate was partially obstructed, but the driver appeared to be watching employee entrances rather than the main house." Adrian finally opened the folder. Inside rested several still photographs taken from security footage. The last image showed Emily walking back toward the mansion, smiling for everyone she passed, while wiping tears from her face only seconds earlier. The room became completely silent. Adrian closed the folder slowly, his expression impossible to read. "Do not approach her," he said at last. "And do not let whoever is watching this estate realize that we have noticed them." Marcus nodded once. "Understood." Adrian turned toward the rain-covered windows, his instincts sharpening with every passing moment. Whatever had followed Emily Parker to the Romano estate was no longer remaining outside the gates. Friday arrived with crisp autumn air and a sky so clear that the distant Chicago skyline shimmered on the horizon. To everyone inside the Romano estate, it looked like another ordinary workday. To Emily Parker, it felt like a deadline she could no longer postpone. She spent the morning frosting chocolate cupcakes with careful hands, determined not to make a single mistake. Every successful swirl felt like a tiny victory. When Chef Daniel complimented the neat rows of desserts, she smiled so brightly that nobody noticed how tired her eyes had become. During lunch, she secretly wrapped 2 leftover sandwiches inside a paper bag instead of eating them herself. One of the younger kitchen assistants noticed and asked, "Saving those for later?" Emily nodded with an awkward grin. "Someone out there probably needs them more than I do." It was the kind of answer that sounded perfectly ordinary, yet Adrian DeLuca remembered every word after Marcus quietly informed him that Emily followed the exact same routine every Friday. At precisely 6 o'clock that evening, after changing into an oversized blue sweater and comfortable sneakers, Emily left through the employee entrance carrying nothing except her worn shoulder bag and the paper sack containing the sandwiches. Marcus observed discreetly from an unmarked vehicle parked half a block away, following Adrian's instructions to remain unseen unless absolutely necessary. Emily walked nearly 3/4 of a mile instead of calling a rideshare, crossing quiet residential streets until she reached a small public park beside an aging bus station. There, beneath a large oak tree whose leaves had already begun turning gold, a dark gray sedan waited with its engine idling. A man stepped out before she reached the bench. Derek Wolfe looked clean, well-dressed, and surprisingly ordinary. Anyone passing by would have mistaken him for a businessman waiting for a friend. He smiled as Emily approached, but there was no warmth behind it. She immediately lowered her eyes. Marcus watched through a telephoto lens as Derek accepted an envelope from Emily, counted the cash without even pretending to thank her, then spoke for several minutes while Emily remained completely silent. She handed him the paper bag containing the sandwiches as well. Derek laughed about something. Emily attempted a weak smile that disappeared almost instantly. Then Marcus noticed the detail Adrian had predicted. Emily apologized. Even from a distance, her body language said the words before her lips did. Shoulders slightly lowered, hands folded together, head bowed with quiet resignation. Derek finally returned to his car, leaving Emily standing alone beneath the tree. She remained there long after the sedan disappeared, staring at the empty road as though hoping it might somehow bring different news next time. She wiped away tears, inhaled deeply, and practiced another cheerful smile before beginning the long walk back toward the estate. Less than 30 minutes later, Marcus entered Adrian's study, carrying a tablet containing the surveillance photographs. Adrian examined each image without speaking. The final photograph showed Derek's face in remarkable detail. Marcus broke the silence. Vehicle registration is false. The identification attached to the license plate belongs to a retired couple in Wisconsin. Adrian enlarged the man's photograph. Background: minimal. Too minimal. Someone erased most of his digital footprint several years ago. That usually means professional assistance. Adrian rested one hand upon the desk. Connections? Marcus hesitated before answering. One possible association: financial transfers linked indirectly to shell companies that have surfaced during investigations involving the Moretti organization. The room became very still. The Moretti name rarely appeared by accident. They had spent years quietly expanding influence across neighboring territories while pretending to operate legitimate businesses. Adrian looked once more at Emily's photograph, her forced smile frozen beneath the fading evening light. She believes she is protecting someone, he said quietly. Marcus nodded. I reached the same conclusion. Adrian closed the tablet and spoke with calm certainty. Then whatever game Derek Wolfe is playing has never been about the money alone. And if the Moretti organization is even remotely involved, Emily Parker walked into something far more dangerous than she understands. Saturday morning unfolded with unusual calm across the Romano estate, but Adrian DeLuca had learned long ago that silence often arrived just before trouble. He spent the first hour reviewing information Marcus had gathered overnight, reading every detail twice without speaking. Derek Wolfe had no stable employment, no verifiable business, and no believable explanation for the money moving quietly through accounts connected to companies already under federal scrutiny. Every trail eventually faded into carefully constructed dead ends. That alone was enough to concern Adrian. People who worked honestly rarely erased their own history. Meanwhile, Emily Parker believed the hardest part of her weekend would be baking 300 miniature fruit tarts for a charity luncheon. She hummed softly while measuring strawberries, accidentally dusted flour across the front of her sweater, and laughed at herself before anyone else could. At least I matched the kitchen now, she joked. Even Mrs. Eleanor Brooks shook her head with reluctant affection. You somehow turn every mistake into entertainment. Emily smiled warmly. It is cheaper than therapy. The women nearby laughed, but the smile faded the instant her phone vibrated inside her apron pocket. She excused herself quietly and slipped through the rear hallway toward the herb garden, believing nobody had noticed. Adrian had. He happened to be crossing the eastern corridor after finishing a security meeting when he saw her disappear through the glass doors. Something about the speed of her steps felt different. Not hurried, not relaxed, resigned. Without announcing himself, he followed at a respectful distance. The garden remained almost empty except for rows of lavender and rosemary moving gently beneath the breeze. Emily stood beside a stone fountain with her back turned, speaking so softly that only fragments reached him. I already paid. I cannot get any more this week. Please do not involve anyone else. She stopped talking and listened. Her shoulders slowly tightened. No. You promised. You said if I kept helping, everything would be over. Another pause. Then came four heartbreaking words spoken so quietly they almost disappeared into the wind. Please leave me alone. The call ended. Emily lowered the phone and remained perfectly still. Adrian took one step forward just as another voice echoed from beyond the estate fence. Looks like you found a better neighborhood. Emily spun around immediately. Derek Wolfe stood outside the decorative iron gate bordering the public road, wearing sunglasses and leaning casually against his sedan as though he had every right to be there. His confident smile never reached his eyes. Emily instinctively pulled her scarf higher around her neck and glanced nervously toward the mansion. You were not supposed to come here, she said. Derek shrugged carelessly. You stopped answering messages quickly enough. I figured I would remind you that promises matter. Adrian remained hidden behind a tall hedge, observing without interruption. He watched Emily take one hesitant step closer to the gate, while carefully keeping several feet of distance between herself and Derek. I told you I need more time, she pleaded. Derek's expression hardened only slightly, but the change was enough to drain the remaining color from Emily's face. Time is expensive, he replied evenly. You still owe me. Emily shook her head. I have given you everything I saved. Not everything, Derek answered. You work for a very powerful man now. The meaning settled heavily between them. Emily's eyes widened with unmistakable alarm. No, she said immediately. I will never do that. Derek smiled again, this time with quiet satisfaction rather than disappointment. Interesting answer. He returned to his car without another word, drove away at an unhurried pace, and disappeared beyond the winding road. Emily remained frozen beside the gate, breathing unevenly as though the conversation had stolen the strength from her legs. Only after the sedan vanished completely did Adrian step into view. Emily turned, startled, her eyes filling with embarrassment rather than relief. She opened her mouth to explain, then stopped. Adrian looked toward the empty road before meeting her frightened gaze. He understood one thing with absolute certainty. Derek Wolfe had never been interested in Emily's money. He wanted access to the Romano Empire, and Emily had just refused to become the door. Emily Parker could not find a single word. She stood beneath the gray autumn sky with both hands wrapped tightly around her phone as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. Adrian DeLuca did not ask another question. He simply studied her face with the quiet patience of a man who had learned that frightened people rarely told the truth when they believed someone else could be hurt because of it. Emily forced a small smile that looked painfully familiar now. I am sorry you had to see that, she whispered. He was just leaving. Adrian glanced once toward the empty road before returning his attention to her. You know him? Emily hesitated. A long time ago. He is still controlling your life. She immediately shook her head. No, it is complicated. Adrian remained silent. Emily looked down at the stone pathway. Please, do not ask anyone to follow him. That request alone confirmed everything he needed to know. A person who feared for herself usually wanted protection. A person who feared for someone else begged others not to get involved. Emily slowly raised her eyes again. I can handle this. Adrian answered with calm certainty. No, you have only been surviving it. Before she could respond, Mrs. Eleanor Brooks appeared from the kitchen entrance calling Emily's name. The charity luncheon guests had arrived early, and every dessert station needed attention. Emily nodded gratefully, almost relieved by the interruption. I should go. She hurried away without looking back, leaving Adrian alone beside the fountain. Marcus approached only after she disappeared inside the mansion. Orders, he asked quietly. Adrian's expression hardened. Increase surveillance beyond the east perimeter. Keep every employee entrance covered. I want every vehicle photographed before it reaches the property. Marcus nodded. And Miss Parker? Adrian answered without hesitation. She does not know she is being protected. That afternoon, while hundreds of guests admired the elegant gardens and carefully prepared dining rooms, another meeting unfolded beneath the estate. Hidden below the main residence, The Romano Security Center displayed live feeds from dozens of cameras spread across neighboring roads. Marcus enlarged several still images gathered over the previous 48 hours. The same gray sedan had appeared 3 different times, always remaining outside estate property, always arriving shortly before Emily's scheduled breaks. Adrian studied every photograph until one detail caught his attention. A second vehicle appeared briefly in the background of 2 separate images. Different color, different model, same timing. Marcus immediately recognized the implication. He is not working alone. Adrian nodded once. Find the second driver. Less than an hour later, another report arrived. Facial recognition produced no identification for the second individual, but the rental agreement for the vehicle had been signed using documents previously connected to one of the Moretti family's logistics companies. Marcus looked up from the screen. This is becoming organized surveillance. Adrian folded his arms. No, this has been organized from the beginning. We simply failed to see the full pattern. Upstairs, completely unaware of the investigation unfolding beneath her feet, Emily accidentally placed blueberry filling into 2 lemon pies before realizing her mistake. She stared at them with exaggerated disappointment. Well, she sighed dramatically, I invented something. Chef Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose before laughing despite himself. You invented confusion. Emily laughed too, and within seconds, everyone in the kitchen joined her. Adrian happened to pass the open doorway at that exact moment. He stopped without entering. The woman laughing with flour on her cheek looked nothing like the frightened person standing beside the garden gate only hours earlier. She smiled so naturally that anyone watching would believe she had never carried a burden in her life. Adrian understood the truth was exactly the opposite. Some people smiled because happiness came easily. Emily smiled because she refused to let fear become the last thing others remembered about her. At that very moment, nearly 5 miles away inside a quiet downtown office building, Derek Wolfe slid a thin folder across a polished conference table toward an elegant woman dressed in white. She opened it slowly and smiled the instant she saw Emily's photograph clipped to the first page. So, the woman said softly, the little baker has finally reached Adrian DeLuca. Derek leaned back comfortably. Exactly as you predicted. The woman's smile widened with chilling satisfaction. Then the real game can finally begin. Monday began before sunrise, and the Romano estate was already alive with unusual activity. Luxury sedans rolled through the front gates one after another as influential guests prepared to attend a private economic summit hosted inside the mansion. Every member of the household understood that nothing could go wrong. Emily Parker repeated those exact words to herself while balancing 3 trays of freshly baked pastries across the kitchen. Nothing can go wrong, she whispered confidently. 2 steps later, she accidentally walked through the wrong doorway and found herself standing inside the private conference corridor reserved for Adrian DeLuca's guests. She froze instantly. Half a dozen executives looked up from their conversations. Emily's eyes widened. I am looking for the dining room, she admitted sheepishly. One elderly guest smiled. Young lady, I believe you have declared war on directions. Her cheeks turned bright red. The directions started it. Soft laughter echoed through the hallway before one of the staff members gently guided her toward the correct entrance. Even Adrian, who had witnessed the entire exchange from the opposite end of the corridor, briefly lowered his eyes to hide the smallest trace of amusement. Yet the moment passed quickly. Marcus approached with quiet urgency. The second vehicle appeared again this morning. It circled the property twice before parking near the Western Service Road. Adrian's expression returned to its usual calm. Continue watching. Nobody moves unless they cross the perimeter. While business discussions filled the grand ballroom upstairs, another meeting unfolded several miles away inside a luxurious penthouse overlooking downtown Chicago. Lucia Moretti stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows dressed in an elegant white suit, calmly studying photographs spread across a marble table. Emily's smiling face appeared in nearly every image. Derek Wolfe entered carrying another envelope. She refused again, he reported. Lucia did not seem disappointed. Instead, she smiled with unsettling confidence. Good. Desperate people become predictable. Kind people become even easier. Derek frowned. What if Adrian simply increases security? Lucia looked toward the skyline. He already has. That means she matters now. She gently tapped Emily's photograph with one perfectly manicured finger. The moment he starts protecting her, he also begins revealing where his attention is divided. Back at the estate, Emily had no idea anyone beyond the gates even knew her name. She spent the afternoon arranging dessert displays for the reception while quietly humming old country songs her grandmother used to sing. One of the younger servers asked why she smiled so often. Emily considered the question carefully before answering, because sometimes smiling reminds your heart that tomorrow still exists. The server nodded thoughtfully, unaware that Adrian had overheard every word while passing through the dining hall. Later that evening, the reception finally ended. Guests departed one by one beneath the glow of antique lanterns lining the circular driveway. Emily volunteered to carry leftover pastries to the employee residence before they spoiled. Marcus immediately assigned 2 guards to monitor the route without her knowledge. Everything appeared perfectly normal until the exterior lights flickered once. Then again, the backup generators activated almost immediately, but the brief interruption created exactly 30 seconds of darkness across the Western Gardens. Security teams responded within moments. Cameras switched automatically to emergency power. Every entrance was verified. Every guest vehicle was accounted for. Almost everything. Marcus frowned while studying the restored camera feeds. Camera 23 lost visual contact for 27 seconds. Adrian stepped beside him. The monitor showed the service path where Emily had been walking only moments earlier. The pastry cart remained overturned beside the stone walkway. Several boxes of desserts lay scattered across the ground. But Emily Parker was nowhere to be seen. Adrian's voice remained remarkably calm despite the sudden silence filling the security room. Seal every gate. Nobody leaves the property until we know exactly what happened. Across the darkened garden, hidden just beyond the reach of the nearest security camera, a small paper bakery box rested upside down in the grass. Written across its lid in Emily's familiar handwriting were the words she had jokingly scribbled earlier that afternoon. Please do not let the cupcakes escape again. The box sat alone beneath the lantern light, but its owner had vanished without a trace. The security center transformed from orderly efficiency into absolute precision within seconds. Every monitor displayed live footage from dozens of cameras covering the Romano estate, nearby roads, and neighboring properties. Marcus Hale directed teams with calm authority, while technicians replayed the missing 27 seconds again and again, searching for anything they had overlooked. Adrian DeLuca stood silently behind them, his attention fixed on the frozen image of the overturned pastry cart. There was no sign of panic, no obvious struggle, and no clear explanation. Only one fact remained undeniable. Emily Parker had disappeared from one of the most heavily protected estates in Illinois. Freeze frame 16, Adrian said quietly. The technician enlarged the image until individual raindrops became visible beneath the security lights. Marcus leaned closer. There, barely visible near the edge of the walkway, was a small white delivery van with the logo of a local floral company. The vehicle had entered legally during the reception and exited less than 2 minutes after the temporary power interruption. Nobody had questioned it because dozens of vendors had been arriving throughout the day. Adrian's voice remained steady. Run every registration connected to that company. Marcus was already typing. Less than 30 seconds later, the answer appeared. The business existed. The delivery schedule did not. The driver's identification had been fabricated using stolen credentials. Adrian turned toward his security team. Locate that van. Across the city, Emily slowly opened her eyes inside a dimly lit storage warehouse. She was sitting on a wooden chair with her hands free, which confused her more than anything else. Nothing around her suggested random criminals. The room was clean, organized. Someone had even placed a bottle of water and a folded blanket beside her. She blinked several times before quietly asking, "Hello." Her voice echoed across the empty building. A nearby door opened, and Derek Wolf stepped inside, carrying a paper bag that smelled unmistakably like fresh coffee. "Good," he said pleasantly. "You are awake." Emily immediately stood. "Why am I here?" Derek placed the coffee on a nearby table as though they were meeting for breakfast instead of inside an abandoned warehouse. "Because I needed a conversation without your employer listening." Emily backed away. "You promised you would leave them alone." Derek sighed dramatically. Emily, you are still worrying about everyone except yourself. Before she could answer, another pair of footsteps echoed through the room. An elegant woman entered wearing a perfectly tailored white coat, her posture graceful enough to command attention without raising her voice. Lucia Moretti studied Emily with calm curiosity, almost like an art collector examining an unexpected painting. You are even more ordinary than I imagined, she said softly. Emily frowned in confusion. I do not know you. Lucia smiled politely. No, but I know quite a bit about you. You bake when you are nervous. You apologize even when nothing is your fault. You skip lunch whenever someone else forgets theirs. And somehow, after less than 2 weeks, Adrian DeLuca has started changing routines because of you. Emily shook her head immediately. That is not true. Lucia walked closer. Really? Additional security. New patrol schedules. More cameras near employee housing. He noticed you. Emily's heart sank. Please, none of this has anything to do with him. Lucia's expression remained perfectly composed. That is exactly what makes you interesting. Miles away, Marcus finally received a breakthrough. A highway traffic camera had captured the fake floral van turning into an industrial district before disappearing beneath an elevated railway. Adrian examined the map for only a moment before recognizing the location. Several abandoned warehouses occupied the area, including buildings once controlled by companies quietly purchased through Moretti Shell corporations years earlier. Marcus reached for his radio. Adrian stopped him with one raised hand. No large convoy. Marcus looked surprised. Sir, Adrian never took his eyes off the map. If this was designed to draw our entire organization into the open, then someone is waiting for exactly that response. We moved carefully. At that same moment, inside the silent warehouse, Emily noticed a tray of untouched pastries resting on a nearby table. She stared at them in disbelief before quietly asking the only question that came to mind. Did someone bring my cupcakes? Derek looked genuinely puzzled. Lucia closed her eyes for one brief second before laughing softly despite herself. Even after everything that had happened, Emily Parker's first concern was dessert. Adrian DeLuca left the Romano estate with only Marcus Hale and 2 trusted security vehicles following several hundred yards behind. Anyone watching from a distance would assume he was traveling alone, exactly as he intended. The industrial district rested beneath aging railroad bridges where abandoned brick warehouses lined empty streets that had long ago been forgotten by ordinary businesses. Rain from the previous evening still glistened across cracked pavement as Adrian parked beside a silent loading dock and stepped out without hesitation. Marcus approached from the opposite direction after confirming every nearby intersection remained under observation. Thermal scans show at least 6 people inside, he reported quietly. No sign of Miss Parker yet. Adrian studied the weathered building. If Lucia Moretti wanted leverage, Emily is alive. Marcus nodded. Agreed. Adrian's eyes moved toward a rusted side entrance hanging slightly open. She expects me to arrive with an army. And we did not. Exactly. Inside the warehouse, Emily Parker sat at a small folding table with untouched cupcakes still resting beside her. She had refused coffee, refused expensive bottled water, and refused to believe any of this made sense. Lucia Moretti returned carrying a leather folder and calmly sat across from her. You have remarkable faith, Lucia observed. Emily blinked. Faith in what? That Adrian DeLuca will come for you. Emily lowered her eyes. He should not. Lucia tilted her head with genuine curiosity. Because you do not matter to him? Emily answered softly. Because too many people could get hurt. Lucia watched her for several thoughtful seconds before asking another question. Has anyone ever chosen you first? Emily looked genuinely confused. I do not understand. Your family, Derek, friends, anyone. Emily remained silent. Lucia smiled almost sympathetically. I thought so. Before Emily could answer, distant footsteps echoed through the building. Derek entered quickly. He is here. Lucia stood without surprise, as though hearing expected news. Earlier than predicted. Derek frowned. He only brought a handful of people. Lucia's smile widened. Interesting. Emily's heartbeat quickened. Please let me speak to him. None of this is necessary. Lucia looked toward the closed warehouse doors. Everything happening today is necessary. Powerful men only reveal themselves when something reaches their heart. Emily shook her head firmly. You are wrong about him. Lucia answered almost playfully. Then let us discover which one of us understands Adrian better. Outside, Adrian crossed the empty loading platform without raising his voice. Lucia. His calm greeting echoed through the warehouse. Moments later, Lucia appeared on an overhead metal walkway overlooking the main floor. Elegant as always, she rested one hand lightly upon the railing. You came exactly as expected. Adrian looked up. Release Miss Parker. Lucia laughed softly. Straight to business. No greeting after all these years. Adrian remained expressionless. You ended that privilege yourself. Lucia pretended to sigh. You always become so cold whenever another woman enters the conversation. Emily finally stepped into view beside Lucia. The moment she saw Adrian standing below, relief flooded her face, followed almost instantly by worry. Please leave, she called down. This is not worth risking everyone else. Adrian never looked away from her. Are you hurt? Emily quickly shook her head. No. Did anyone mistreat you? No. Only after hearing those two answers did Adrian allow himself a quiet breath. Lucia noticed the subtle change immediately. There it is, she whispered with satisfaction. Concern. Adrian shifted his attention back to Lucia. State your demand. Lucia slowly closed the distance to Emily and rested one hand lightly upon the young woman's shoulder, not threatening, simply possessive enough to make her point. Simple. I want access to one encrypted shipment schedule moving through Romano Logistics next month. Adrian answered without hesitation. No. Lucia smiled as though expecting exactly that reply. Emily looked desperately between them. Please stop arguing because of me. As she hurried one nervous step forward, the toe of her sneaker caught the edge of a loose wooden pallet. She stumbled with a startled gasp, accidentally bumping into a nearby rolling storage cart. The cart drifted across the smooth concrete floor, gently collided with a tall stack of empty plastic containers, and sent dozens of lightweight bins tumbling harmlessly across the warehouse with an astonishing amount of noise. Every guard from both sides instinctively turned toward the unexpected commotion. For one absurd second, the carefully controlled standoff dissolved into complete confusion because Emily Parker had accidentally declared war on a stack of storage boxes. The echo of tumbling plastic containers rolled through the warehouse like an unexpected wave, leaving everyone staring in the wrong direction for one priceless moment. Emily Parker stood frozen in the middle of the scattered bins, her face glowing bright red with embarrassment. I am so sorry, she blurted instinctively. I did not mean to start, whatever this is. Even Marcus Hale looked briefly confused before realizing what had happened. Adrian DeLuca, however, did not take his eyes off Emily. He simply walked forward with measured confidence while every distracted guard hurried to clear the fallen containers. Lucia Moretti watched the scene unfold with growing curiosity rather than frustration. She had spent years studying powerful people, and one lesson had never failed her. Real priorities revealed themselves during unexpected moments. Adrian did not look at the guards. He did not acknowledge Derek Wolfe. He did not even respond to Lucia. His attention remained entirely on the young woman apologizing to a pile of empty storage boxes as though they had feelings. Emily finally noticed Adrian standing only a few feet away. I think I made everything worse, she whispered miserably. Adrian glanced at the scattered containers before answering in the calm voice that somehow steadied every room he entered. No, you reminded everyone that they are human. Emily blinked in surprise. I did. Yes. She looked down at the floor. That was not exactly my plan. For the first time in years. The corner of Adrian's mouth lifted into the faintest smile. Lucia noticed it immediately, and the sight erased the pleasant expression from her own face. She had known Adrian through negotiations, rivalries, and impossible situations. She had seen him angry, patient, determined, and merciless. She had never seen him smile because of someone else's clumsiness. Something inside her shifted. Interesting, she murmured quietly. Derek looked toward her. What changed? Lucia answered without taking her eyes off Adrian. Everything. She slowly reached into the leather folder she had brought and removed a single photograph before gently tossing it onto the concrete floor between Adrian and Emily. The picture slid to a stop beside Emily's sneaker. Emily bent down, picked it up, and immediately felt her breathing stop. It showed her younger foster sister, Lily, smiling outside a community college only 2 weeks earlier. On the back, someone had written the date in black ink. Emily's hands began trembling. Where did you get this? Lucia folded her arms. Now we can stop pretending Derek was interested in your savings. Emily looked up in confusion. Lucia continued calmly. Every dollar you handed him was meaningless. We simply wanted to learn whether you would protect someone you loved, even when nobody protected you. Adrian's expression hardened. Enough games. Lucia nodded. Very well. Here is the truth. She looked directly at Emily. Months ago, Lily unknowingly copied financial records while working part-time for a shipping company. Those records exposed transactions linking charitable foundations to businesses secretly controlled by the Moretti organization. She never understood what she had seen, but someone stored an encrypted backup on her personal cloud account. Emily stared at the photograph, completely overwhelmed. Lily does not even know how to use encrypted software. Exactly, Lucia replied. Which means she has no idea what she possesses. We believe fear would eventually convince you to help us find it. Emily slowly shook her head. I never knew any of this. Adrian believed her instantly. Lucia noticed that as well. She smiled with quiet disappointment. You truly chose her without understanding the game. Emily closed her eyes as tears gathered despite every effort to remain composed. She is my sister. I would choose her every time. The warehouse became completely silent. Adrian looked at Emily with a new understanding. She had not spent weeks surrendering her savings because she was weak. She had sacrificed everything because she believed someone else's future mattered more than her own. In that single moment, Adrian realized the bruises, the apologies, the constant smiles, and every frightened phone call had never been signs of helplessness. They had been the quiet cost of extraordinary kindness. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Emily Parker continued staring at the photograph of Lily, her fingers trembling as though the glossy paper weighed far more than it should. Adrian DeLuca stepped forward until he stood beside her, close enough that she no longer seemed alone, yet careful enough not to invade the fragile space she still guarded around herself. Emily, he said quietly, look at me. She slowly lifted her eyes. Everything I did was supposed to keep her safe, she whispered. If I had known they wanted something else, I would have told someone. Adrian nodded once. I know. Lucia Moretti watched the exchange with growing frustration. You believe her that easily? Adrian answered without hesitation. Yes. Lucia laughed softly, but there was no warmth in the sound. You once trusted nobody without proof. Now you trust a woman because she cries for someone else. Adrian remained perfectly calm. No. I trust her because every decision she made cost her something and benefited only another person. The warehouse fell silent again. Even Derek Wolfe lowered his eyes for a brief moment, as though recognizing a truth he had never expected anyone to say aloud. Lucia folded the photograph back into her folder and closed it with deliberate care. Very well, she said. Then let us end this differently. She reached into her coat pocket and removed a small flash drive, placing it carefully on the nearby table instead of using it as another threat. The records we wanted are no longer worth the attention they have attracted. Too many investigators are already following the money. Adrian studied her carefully. Then why bring Emily here? Lucia looked directly at him. Because I needed to know whether the most disciplined man in Chicago still had a heart. She smiled with quiet disappointment. Now I have my answer. Emily looked between them in confusion. So, this was never about me? Lucia turned toward her. It became about you the moment he changed because of you. Emily frowned thoughtfully before saying the first honest thing that entered her mind. That seems like a very complicated way to ask someone whether they care. Marcus Hale quietly cleared his throat to hide what sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Even one of Lucia's own associates looked away, struggling to maintain a serious expression. Lucia closed her eyes briefly before shaking her head. You truly are impossible. Emily offered an apologetic smile. People tell me that a lot. Adrian looked at Lucia one final time. This ends today. Lucia nodded slowly. It does. She turned toward Derek. We are leaving. Derek hesitated. Just like that. Yes, Lucia replied. There is nothing left here worth winning. Within moments, her team withdrew without another argument, disappearing through the warehouse doors with quiet discipline. The echo of their footsteps gradually faded until only Adrian, Marcus, Emily, and the Romano security team remained. Emily released a long breath she had been holding for what felt like hours. Her knees suddenly felt weak, and before she realized what was happening, she swayed slightly. Adrian reached out instinctively, steadying her by the forearm before she lost her balance. She looked up at him with embarrassed gratitude. "I promise I am usually better at standing." Adrian glanced down at the scattered plastic containers still covering the floor from her earlier accident. "The evidence suggests otherwise." Emily stared at him for 1 second before realizing he had just made a joke. A surprised laugh escaped her so suddenly that everyone nearby looked in their direction. Marcus blinked twice in disbelief. He had worked beside Adrian DeLuca for nearly 12 years and could count the man's jokes on one hand. Emily smiled through grateful tears. "I think that might have been funny." Adrian's expression remained almost perfectly serious, but the warmth in his eyes answered for him. Together they walked toward the warehouse exit as the late afternoon sunlight finally broke through the clouds. And for the first time since arriving at the Romano estate, Emily no longer felt like she was carrying the weight of the world by herself. I can't accurately continue part 13 from part 12 because part 12 is not present in this conversation. Creating new events or character developments would break the continuity you explicitly asked me to preserve. Please provide part 12 or the full story so far, and I will continue directly with part 13 following all of your formatting requirements. A single block enclosed in one pair of square brackets, no line breaks. English only, about 550 words, consistent characters, timeline, and setting, no title recap, no CTA, no extra text, and a complete ending.